Okay, if I can have your attention, we're going to go ahead and get started. I am so excited to welcome you here to the November Women in Ag Leadership Luncheon. I'm Laura Perry Johnson. I'm the Associate Dean for Extension in the College of Ag and Environmental Sciences. And this is the third in a series of Women in Ag Leadership Luncheons that we've done. The purpose of this is to bring together those of us in the college, not just women, but everyone, because my idea is when people know each other better, then they will have a better time working together and they'll be more apt to work together. So what we've been trying to do is feature a very basic scientist and a very applied scientist so that we can get to know more about the scope of this college and what goes on here. Now today I really hit the jackpot because I think I got one of the most basic scientists we have and one of the most applied scientists we've had. So you can see the breadth of what we do in this college. I want to welcome everyone. It looks like Griffin has a great crowd. We also have a few down in Tifton. And how are y'all? Thank y'all for being there. And up here, glad to have this many of you here. We invite our allied colleges, forestry, vet med, family, consumer science, some of our USDA partners. So it's not just the College of Ag and Environmental Sciences here today, because that's another thing we need to do is all work across lines to address the complex issues that we have today. I do want to thank Carla and Angela. They set all of this up. I basically showed up actually late today because I had another meeting, but I really appreciate their efforts and keeping this going. If you haven't looked online, we do have a Women in Ag website. We also have a Facebook page, so you can like that. If you find good stuff, you can share it on the Facebook page, or we can put it on our blog. But we try to kind of keep that going. So I appreciate Carla's help and Angela's help with that. With no further ado, I am going to introduce our first speaker to you today. Julia Gaskin and I have known each other forever. She is one of those great extension specialists that she does so much, it's really hard to capture exactly what she does. So, as always, when you want to know something, you Google people. So, I did Google Julia to see what it said about her, but if I had to tell you, what I know Julia does, Julia is passionate about anything sustainable, anything organic, and she's just passionate about the environment. Her academic home is crop and soil science. She's a public service faculty, but she's worked on a variety of things, cover crops, conservation tillage, water. She's going to tell us some of those things. So when I really kind of made a list of all the stuff she does, I would call Julia a jack of all trades. She's very good at issue programming. She's very good at flexing when the issues come down the pipe. She was one of our faculty that was actually in ag engineering, and when engineering moved out of our college, she moved to crop and soil science, and actually her department head, Don Chilluns, here, so I'm excited that he is joining us today. She is the co-coordinator of the state SARE program, which is, she'll tell us a little bit about that probably. And she's 100% extension appointment. Oh, you're not? 80% extension appointment. So I am going to turn it over to Julia, and we are so thrilled that you are here today. Earlier this week, she was awarded the D.W. Brooks Award, so this has been a great week for Julia. So congratulations, and we're excited to have you here.
Yeah. So thank you all for being here. All right, first I got to Carla said that this is just very straightforward. So I said, what do you mean it doesn't work, right? So we're going to
it should be over there, yeah.
Right, so I titled this The Long and Winding Road. And this is really 3 confessions. I guess I'm glad Don and Bob are here because Laura asked me to talk about how I got here as an extension specialist, and it really is, how did I get here? Because I didn't come through it by the normal path. I was born and raised in Asheville, North Carolina. So when I got down here, I made this joke earlier this week. Many of the specialists in Tipton told me I was cotton deficient. We didn't do cotton in the mountains of North Carolina. My parents didn't farm, neither did my grandparents. What? So I have a Bachelor of Science in Psychology from Duke University, that great ag school, right? So I have a master's in forest soils and hydrology. So that might be a little bit better for ag, but it's still not ag. And then I did environmental consulting for another 10 years. So, you know, basically this is not really looking like an extension specialist here, is it? So remember that, administrators. Sometimes the biography is maybe not what you expect. So in the beginning, I do come from a long line of people who have deeply cared about the land. My great-grandfather, Charles Aurelius Webb, owned the Asheville Citizen-Times, and he was one of the people that got the Great Smokies National Park established. So if you drive on the Blue Ridge Parkway today, you will see Webb Overlook named for him. My mother did not work when I was growing up. She did do a lot of volunteering. And she worked very hard to get the French Broad River cleaned up. If you go to Asheville now and go down to the River District, when I grew up, it had foam in the river from the paper mills and tires and junk cars all in it. Now it is a huge gathering place. And you will see Gene Webb Park named after my mom. So I also had a grandmother who loved to garden. So I feel like I had a real heritage of service there. Sorry. So I went off to Duke, fell in love with Duke. I was the traitor in the family. Everybody else went to UNC Chapel Hill and were Tar Heels. I got fascinated by how the brain works. So I started, and I think this happens to a lot of undergraduates when you don't know what you want to do. The first really good professor that you meet, you think, that's it. I had a great professor for the biological basis of psychology. And I ended up in my sophomore year working in a neuroanatomy lab on the visual system with squirrels because they have really good depth perception. It's a good analog for human visual system. Back in that time, we had very little understanding of the pathways in the brain and very few tools to do it. So we actually had to inject radioactive tracers in their poor little brains, let them live for a while, then sacrifice them, freeze the brains, and then slice them to trace the neurons. After a year of that, I decided I wasn't a real lab rat, and I probably wasn't going to do that for the rest of my life. But it did teach me a lot about science. I also was able to explore another side of myself that I deeply love, and that's music. I had played guitar and sung, but I took up the cello, and I was lucky enough to audition and be able to sing in the Duke Chapel Choir, and that's probably meant the most to me over the years in a lot of reasons. So at Duke, when you're going to try to graduate with honors, you have to do a senior thesis. And since I didn't want to work with squirrel brains anymore, I decided to go back to my love of music, and I did an undergraduate thesis on consonants and dissonance in music. And I tried to compare how music majors and lay people would perceive different intervals. Some intervals we think of as being pleasing and some not. It turns out that it's very similar to abstract words like love and justice. If you don't put it in a context, the intervals don't mean much by themselves. And we actually had to use principal components analysis to get to this. So that was a really good start in just learning how to do science, even though it has nothing to do with agriculture. So I would say to you all, don't underestimate the value of a good liberal arts education, and that you do need to follow your passion, even if it is a long, winding road. And I learned a lot of research basics there. So, and I will say that once I realized that psychology wasn't what I was going to do, I started taking geology and botany, which I could do because it's a Bachelor of Science. So I did get that good science background. And then I worked with a program that was an outward bound program for juvenile delinquents that we call Hoods in the Woods, teaching them rock climbing and canoeing. And that's how I met my husband. I couldn't find an old picture of him. It would have been pretty hilarious. And I will say, back in the 80s, yes, it was de rigueur to wear gaudy fluorescent spandex to climb in. Pretty embarrassing now, right? But the other thing was that the climbing community back then was very small. You could climb in North Carolina, go to the Tetons, and meet people that you knew. And I knew one other woman at that point who was a serious climber. So basically, I spent a lot of time with being the only woman in a male-dominated sport. Does that sound like agriculture? So I learned some lessons there. We also moved out to, I said my grandparents didn't farm, and they didn't because my maternal grandfather died when my mother was 6. But they had a farm, an old farm that they had rented out with a tobacco lot and apple trees. We got married and moved out there and tried to rebuild that cabin. We should have bulldozed it. And you can see, we had no money. You can see the compost pile that I built out of scrap lumber. And I decided I was going to grow vegetables to sell to restaurants and grocery stores. Does this sound familiar? I had no experience. I knew nothing. I did not have a business plan. I did not have any money. This sounds exactly like the young farmers that many of them that I work with today. So I understand from a very visceral experience. I grew tomatoes, lettuce, and other things, and there was one restaurant in Asheville at the time that would even consider that, and a small grocery store at the end of our cove. So, not a lot of sales, put up a lot of food. We ate pretty well. So, I learned to grow stuff. By experience, I read a lot. I did meet my county agent and get a soil test. So there's my first introduction to something that might look like agriculture. I decided that I wanted to go into forestry for a variety of reasons. Applied to a bunch of grad schools, Clemson, NC State. They told me, no, you have to go back and get an undergraduate degree. So I applied to the Forest Service. Got a temporary job as a technician at the Coweeta Hydrologic Lab, I think because Dr. Lloyd Swift got a PhD from Duke in meteorology, and he figured I might have something on the ball. And I worked on an acid rain study and basically hiked gallons of water samples out of these steep watersheds where there weren't roads into. Learned a lot about sampling soil and water, and learn basic good lab techniques, quality control, sanitation, how you measure things. And that led to graduate school. Since Coweeta had such a strong connection through the Ecology School Institute with Warnell, I ended up applying there and to Clemson and to NC State, and they all accepted me that time. But came here and did a thesis on water and solute movement of a Pinus strobus plantation, white pine, during storm events. So I really got fascinated by soil at that point and how soil affects water quality and the chemical composition of streams. So this was my site. And when it rained, I would go up there and collect rainfall, the water that came through the canopy called through fall, stem flow, litter, and through 3 layers of soil. I ended up getting pregnant with my first child, and I collected my last storm in Thanksgiving, and she was born in January. So this meant I was going up, staying in a trailer by myself, getting up in the middle of the night with a raincoat and headlight, trudging up the mountain and collecting samples every 2 to 4 hours. And I will tell you at that point, there were older professors at Cornell who had thought I had no business being in grad school, period. And when I got pregnant, they really didn't think I had any business there. But we worked through that too. So that was great training. So I will say about Chilluns, one of these, and there they are, right after my youngest was born. You can see Alex, the middle one. He was always the one getting in scrapes, tried to race his sister, I think, that time on a bike and didn't take the corner quite right. I heard one of our speakers say that you can have it all. You can have a career, and you can have a family. And I think you can't have it all, but you can have enough, basically. You younger folks, you're always making trade-offs, and it's not a decision you make one time. You make it every single day. I was really lucky. My husband would pick up slack when I had to travel. But I'll be frank, you miss a lot, and you can't be the mom where your kid's chosen for the soccer team because you bring the best snacks, because you're not bringing homemade cookies, right? But despite my fears that the health department might shut us down, we did all survive. And this is us this summer at my daughter's wedding. She got married in August. So after graduate school, I moved into environmental consulting. I spent 10 years mapping soils, delineating wetlands, doing wetland function, wetland mitigation. It was a small company, so I got to do a lot of things: acid mine drainage, an arsenic contamination site, in which I worked with Dr. Malcolm Sumner. Maybe some of you all remember him. And it was for a court case, so I had to make him sample everything according to EPA protocol. Ever since then, he told me it was rubbish, the sampling protocol. Ever since then, he called me Queenie, because I was the queen of the sampling protocol. So he, to this day, still calls me Queenie. And I did a lot of designing land application systems. And those of you from forestry may recognize Dr. Larry Morris in that picture. We were mapping soils down in North Carolina in the rain, I believe, in that one. So this firm did a lot of wastewater application sites, both in forest and in hayfields. So again, I was looking at assimilative capacity of the land, not only for nutrients, but for water. And we did a lot of fairly innovative work. So consulting was actually really good training, because when you're working on billable hours, you don't have time to dilly-dally. And you're supposed to be 80% billable. So you learn to be efficient, you learn to be a problem solver, you never have enough data, there's never enough money. You've got to trust your professional judgment. You've got to learn succinct technical writing pretty quick. And it was actually, I think, really good training for this job. And also learning permitting regulations and developing relationships with federal and state regulators. But I did decide that it wasn't really for me, so I came back to UGA. I think it was 1999 or 98. And as a land application specialist working with the Agricultural Pollution Prevention Program. And you can see I started right off the bat trying to work on my cotton deficiency. And that top picture is the first Ag Expo I ever went to. And I got out and harvested plots with Glenn Harris and Philip Roberts and Mike Bader, who's no longer with us, and jumped right in there. And then we started looking at some projects with some industrial byproducts as fertilizers for cotton. We also focused on waste recycling and beneficial reuse, and Laura mentioned that I've been issue driven, and that's true. This was all driven by either state regulators or industry or someone saying, we need somebody to work on this. So we worked with composting when there were municipalities that had problems with that. We did quite a bit of work with recycling home building materials, including wallboard, ground wallboard, which is basically gypsum, and did some work with engineered wood products. You can see we had rainfall simulators out there looking at runoff and the impacts of this stuff on soils. When I first started, there wasn't an animal waste specialist, and there was a lot of issues with the animal waste regulations changing in Georgia, so we focused a lot on poultry litter and some with dairy. Worked with Dr. Hovland because we didn't have a forage specialist, and pulled in people from Auburn, Mary Miller Goodman, to look at impact of grazing. So we were always looking at the issues and who can we pull in as a team to address this issue and get the information and get the programming done that we need for farmers and county agents. But remember, my true love is the soil, so I started focusing on production systems that would build soil carbon. And conservation tillage systems are what we know we can use to build soil health and soil carbon in row crop systems. So again, collaborating with NRCS, ARS, we did displays down at Ag Expo. We started a conservation production school, and I've worked with a lot of our extension specialists on that, and we're running that still. We've got one in Coffee County again this year, did county agent training in this area. Then my former department head over in BAE Engineering was working with pyrolysis as an energy, alternative green energy option. They needed to know what to do with the byproduct, which is biochar. So I was asked to evaluate that for agronomic use, and we did the first field scale evaluation of peanut, and it was the first field scale evaluation of biochar in the US, period. We did a number of projects on this, folks, and we didn't see any effects. So when y'all look at the internet and see that this is going to double your yields and everything else, I would ask you to take that with a grain of salt. But I will say on ResearchGate, I still see that, especially from China and other parts of the world, they're picking up on those papers that I had published on this. There's still a lot of interest out there on this. So I was asked to be the Southern SARE State Coordinator. Southern SARE has a professional development program where they give us a little bit of money each year to train the trainer. And I work with Dr. Mark Lattimore down at Fort Valley State on this, and we put together programming for county agents. We have an advisory committee that helps us identify issues that people need training on, along with the PDCs for the extension. We did a lot of stakeholder meetings across the state to look at what our college needed to focus on for sustainable agriculture, and then Scott Engel asked me to kind of head that up. So what we focused on, even though sustainable ag is economics, environment, and the social aspects, we focused on systems that we know will build soil carbon because they tie a lot of the benefits, environmental benefits that we want to see in that. That pulled me into actually working with organic agriculture. And again, we heard from growers we needed better information on mid-scale organic vegetable production. So worked with Dr. Boyan and Hort, and Dr. Little and Plant Path. Sam Canenda was a PhD student that worked with us, and we did a cool season vegetable rotation evaluation, which is being published in Hort Tech, and we're working on an extension bulletin for that right now. So I did decide several years ago that it was time for me to get back to some of my true loves, and I've really focused on cover crops lately. And been lucky to work with Miguel Cabrera and Dave Kissel. They had done a lot of basic science on predicting nitrogen from cover crops. I've been able to take that tool out to the research farms and on farm and test it and show that we can predict a nitrogen credit with this tool. If they reduce their nitrogen use by that much, they're going to be very close to getting similar yields with a full nitrogen rate. So we're pretty pleased with that. And then finally, we've pulled together a wide group of partners to start a beginning farmer rancher program for the state. And you can see the partners we have here. And I do think that these kind of collaborations are what are key for success and key to help you leverage your time and your resources and your influence. So I would say lessons learned to me are, I think extension and ag are going to have to pull more and more on people like myself that didn't grow up in 4-H necessarily or on a farm. I think our perspective can bring diversity and some new looks at things, and that's not a bad thing. If you come from that point of view, you've got to work extra hard to learn the culture. And I think I've been able to do that. I would say to you all, and I really wanted to talk more to students here, is be a yes person. Be a yes person. I know you have to say no sometimes, but be a person that's open to new ideas and open to these collaborations and it's amazing that the work that you can get done when you have that kind of positive attitude. In terms of working in a male-dominated area, I really haven't had much problems with that. And I'll just tell you frankly that if you go into it with a chip on your shoulder, you're never going to get anywhere. Assume people have good intentions. If they're teasing you, it's because they like you, right? And you can disarm a lot with some humor. One of my first meetings when I got into extension, we were going around the room introducing ourselves, and I said I was a land application specialist, and we went around the table, and an older extension specialist, who I will not name, said, "I'm the land application specialist," and it was clearly a challenge. And I looked at him and laughed and said, "I'll arm wrestle you for it." And the whole table cracked up, and it diffused the situation. So if you can, try to use those tools. And don't forget your family and friends and your soul, whatever that is. Your church, your house of worship, music, art. Don't forget your soul in this process. So things have changed a lot. Here's the farm crew out at JPC, right? And I will leave you with this because I feel like there has been so much fear and negativity in the last year. This is something I'm trying to hold on to in my life. So thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to speak with you.
Thank you so much, Julia. That was great. I think this is so interesting. If you weren't able to be at the previous sessions with us, those talks are archived, and it really is interesting to see the circuitous route that people take to end up at the same place. You know, for myself, this is not the path I mapped out to get here, but, you know, I think it's really interesting to see the diversity in our backgrounds and our training and our experiences, and that makes us so much richer, so much better. So I think it's very interesting. Well, our next speaker is Dr. Esther Knaap, and I am so excited to have her here because she might think I've been stalking her, but from the very time that we started talking about trying to lure her to the University of Georgia, I knew she was a superstar, and then I found out she worked on vegetables, what is one of the largest industries in Georgia, vegetables. So I was like, there's got to be ways that this lady can play into our need for support in the vegetable industry in Georgia. And so, you know, I heard Bob talk about for months and months and months about this lady has one of the best greenhouses in the universe because he helped her get it. And but she was one of those people that was recruited by the university in one of the special hiring initiatives to give us more power in certain areas. So I've been wanting to ask her to come speak because I want to know more about what she does. I've visited her lab, I've seen her greenhouse, I've seen her posters, but I think that we'll all learn a lot today. Esther works in horticulture, is her actual home, and she is in the Center for Applied Genetic Technologies. She works on the size and shape of tomatoes. So Julia and her, I mean, isn't that great? She's inventing it, and Julia's out there trying to help us adapt how to grow it. She's one of those rainmakers that you hear the provost talk about. When the provost says we want to bring those rainmakers to Georgia, you're about to meet one of them today. She works at the molecular level, so like I said, a very, very basic scientist and a very, very applied scientist. I'm one of those people that, you know, had some training in the basic area, but boy, it didn't take me very long to figure out that was not my cup of tea. I am an applied person. But if we can't respect all of those different facets, then we'll never be all we can be working together. So even if you don't work in the basic area or you don't work in the applied area, you know, we're all part of the same supply chain. So I think it's really important for us to understand that basic research that goes on as well as the applied application of it. So I'm excited to have Esther Knaap with us today, and she's going to tell us about what she does.
Esther, it is already there. Great. That's right.
Wow, thank you for the introduction. I didn't expect anything like this. I grew up in a country where you never trump up yourself at all, ever. So this is a bit an unusual situation. And indeed, I'm very grateful for the opportunities that UGA has given to me, including a phenomenal greenhouse that is now fully operational. The tomatoes are doing very well. And I wanted to share with you today, let's see if I can figure this out. Pointer working, yeah. I want to share with you today my history. I'm not going to go very much into detail in the molecular aspect of the research that we do, but I'm just going to give you towards the end more of an overview of the work that we do. And indeed, I'm very excited at some point to translate this more directly to growers. I do have small projects already with breeders at NC State and Florida. It would be great to actually initiate something here as well. So one of the most common questions, and that's probably your question, I like your accent. Where are you from? If you didn't, well, then you're unusual. But anytime I'm in a grocery store or anywhere, actually, this is the question that I most commonly get. What's my accent? And where am I from? Well, that's actually getting a little bit tricky to answer the question, where am I from? Because I've lived for more than half my life in the US. So when I say I'm from Ohio, that's where I was for 40 years. No, before that. So I can go on for quite a while until I'm finally, what really the question is, where is your accent from? And I'll tell you about that. And of course, next question most people ask is actually what brought me to the US. Is it working? not very well. It's all right. I don't have to point very much. Oh, I can do this one. Yeah, that's better. I should know about that. Yeah. Having spent 14 years at Ohio State at a remote campus, I know we have to use the mouse on the computer screen so everybody can see. So I am indeed in the Department of Horticulture. I'm also a member of the Institute of Plant Breeding, Genetics and Genomics. I'm a member of the Plant Center and Developmental Biology Alliance. What's it? To move forward? Yes. Yeah, but I can also do this. Okay, yeah, it's all right. Either way, yeah. And I'm adjunct faculty in plant biology and genetics, so I've spent the gamut here. So where am I from? Well, my name should have given that away. The way it's spelled, with a small v and a small d and the capital K is only unique to the Netherlands. So I am from the Netherlands, which is a country in Northern Europe, bordered by Germany on the east and then Belgium on the south. And why it's called the Netherlands, most people ask that question, and not Holland, or what's the difference between Holland and the Netherlands? The Netherlands is the name for the whole country, but Holland is actually technically the name of only two provinces here, North Holland and South Holland. And granted, that is the economic heartland of, or the main part of the Netherlands is North and South Holland. The government is in South Holland, here near Delft, or The Hague, here it is. And then, of course, the capital of the Netherlands is Amsterdam. But the whole country is named the Netherlands. And it's mostly under sea level. I grew up in a town called Rijsenhout. It's very close to a town that if you're a horticulturist, you know. It's Aalsmeer. It's where the largest flower auction in the world is located. But Aalsmeer, if you don't know, Aalsmeer is actually very close to Amsterdam. So here's where I grew up, pretty much. And I grew up really literally 3 miles from the gates at the airport. So the landing strips are only about a mile away from where I grew up. And I'm mentioning that I grew up in a very large extended family. I truly have about 80 first cousins. So figure out how many aunts and uncles I have. It's more than 50, more than 20. And why I mentioned that, because Laura asked me, so we want to hear how you got interested in agriculture. It's kind of a funny question to ask me. And I hope I can answer that politically correctly, because I kind of think I got out of agriculture. I didn't actually get interested in agriculture. I was totally born in it. And this is an aerial overview of the area where I grew up in. And what I want you to notice is everything that's white or greenhouses that are painted. And grays are also greenhouses, a lot of greenhouses in this area. This is my hometown called Rijsenhout. Aalsmeer is just here, Amsterdam is here. This is the highway or the freeway between The Hague and Amsterdam. And the airport is right here with the landing strip that you can see here. So I have 80 first cousins and a lot of aunts and uncles, and they predominantly occupy only one industry. I mentioned greenhouses, so you can guess what that is. They were all, not all, half of them were nurserymen. And so just to highlight how I grew up and where I grew up, I have 2 uncles that own these 2 nurseries, another 2 that own these 2. I have an uncle here in town. They all retired by now, almost all of them. And then I grew up here, it's a little strip here with 6 nurseries, of which 4 were either my parents or 3 other family members. So what got me interested in agriculture? I had no choice, I was born into it. And large extended families have lots of parties together, and that was the top of the discussion list was always, managing the industry. This was normal to me. Actually, being in production agriculture, that was the standard. So many years later, I just want to show what my brothers are now doing. So actually first showing what it looks like. This is actually not a picture of my parents' greenhouse, but it very much looks like it. If I had a picture of that, I have a lot of pictures that are not digital, so it was a little bit hard to pull up originals. But we had a big greenhouse, of course, a canal next to it. There's a lot of water in the Netherlands. A natural dike here, and so this is kind of how my parents' nursery looked like. These are some actual pictures, but after my father had actually closed the greenhouse. This is the greenhouse of my dad. Continued on in this direction, and this is the greenhouse of my uncle. And here's my dad with 2 of the grandkids after retirement. This is a picture from the window of the bedroom we stay in, and looking out over the nursery of my uncle. So my brothers, I have 3 younger brothers. This is my youngest brother. He started out growing hydrangeas. He changed his career path a little bit. My middle brother, Maurice, is not a nurseryman, but he's an engineer. He got an engineering degree, and he works together with a lettuce grower on developing hydroponic system to grow lettuce. His business is called Cultivation Systems, if anybody's interested. No, he has come to Athens a few times before I even moved here, and has a very large project out in Tennessee with lettuce growers there. And then my oldest brother, Menno, is the closest related to my father's business. He's not growing roses like my dad did, but cymbidiums or orchids. He's in the greenhouse here trying to straighten these stems with flowers as they develop. And this is a nice showing of mature cymbidium flowers that are ready to be harvested. And then they all get packaged in the hen house, like is shown here, proudly displayed by my dad. This is how they go to the auction and are being sold off all over the world. So that's my background. And so when I was in high school, one of the most intense experiences, I think, growing up in my family was not the fact that we had always big parties, everybody getting together, and my uncles would always complain about the gas prices were too high, and the roses didn't make enough money. They would complain about that, but that was not what I really found troubling. What was really hard for me growing up, and I've seen my dad do that until he retired, is always the uncertainty if we had enough money to pay people. And I recall him being on the phone one time with the bank, like, please pay my workers, because they were all making minimum wage. They didn't have a lot of extra money in the bank. And so when there's financial issues in business, it is really hard. And I did not want to have anything to do with it. I didn't mind that my dad was working all the time, because he was. I didn't mind doing that. I didn't mind, you can always complain about things, and we complain about everything. That's not the problem. It was just the uncertainty. I wanted to have at least my paycheck be more stable than often agricultural business shows. So was I going to have a career in agricultural industry? Yeah, production-based work. Yeah, there were other things going on when I was in high school. That I loved biology. I learned about biology, and I actually became interested more in how things work inside a cell. I learned about genomes and DNA, and that would make an RNA, which is a gene, and then the RNA gets translated into a protein. I really, really wanted to learn about that. And I thought also the kind of work that my dad was doing at that time, it seems so monotonous. It was always stressful, but you were always doing for many years the same. I know that is not true, but that's how I experienced it. So I wanted to do something different. And I wanted to have a career that was not dependent on whether I had a product to sell. So I went to college. And this was in the Netherlands, Wageningen University, which was at that time called Landbouwhogeschool. It wasn't named university, but that became later. And that was for me. Yes, well, I don't know. I didn't even, when I was in high school, I didn't even believe I could finish high school because I had no example in front of me in my family. My family barely went to high school. And so that I went to this particular high school that you have to do to have a possibility to go into university. I had nobody in front of me that actually finished high school. So that was scary, but going to college was even more, wow, what was I gonna do? So fortunately, I took on the challenge, and with a lot of support from my family, meaning, you can do it, go as far as you can, because my parents weren't offered the same opportunities. I made it through college fine. And so I chose Wageningen. I chose plant pathology because at that time, as a major at that time, and still does, it had a lot of different type of programs you could follow. So plant pathology is very broad. You can study plant pathology from a very applied aspect, from an extension aspect, from a population genetics aspect, or from a molecular aspect. And that's what I liked about the program plant pathology. And it allowed me to actually really choose the career path that I still have today. And so my thesis towards the end of my degree, and this is the beautiful thing about the degree from Wageningen, is that I had 1.5 years of solid research experience. No classes, but solid research experience. So I spent 6 months in molecular biology. That's how I learned my pet. I spent 6 months in nematology. Nematodes are terrible plant parasitic organisms. That was my specialty in plant pathology. And I spent 3 months in genetics. And so I got an enormous amount of research experience from actually doing that. So it wasn't only, hey, I like to know how things work, but I also learned that I like to do the work that leads to that. And I think that is really, really very important. So then I graduated, and then what? Well, I came to the US. I landed in UC Riverside in 1990. And why did I come here? Well, I graduated in the Netherlands. I realized that I really wanted to do more work in a laboratory. I liked being in a laboratory. I liked learning more about those techniques. But there were very few opportunities at that time. There's no such thing as a temporary tech position here or there. That's quite complicated in the Netherlands because you have to have special training before they even consider you. And so I was very fortunate that I was able to go to a laboratory at UC Riverside where there was a nematology lab where I could actually start honing more my skills. And I figured out I'll figure out what I want to do later. But I didn't have, and it was indicated earlier, I didn't have a clear path. But that time, that's what I wanted to learn. And so I followed that. I followed my passion. I didn't really follow a path. And so here, my interests were at the time, and still are, in molecular biology, nematology, and genetics. And that meant, of course, lab and greenhouse work. I wanted to know how things work in the cell and in plant tissues. And this 6 months exchange exercise, as I call it, because it wasn't really a program. I just said, hey, can I come to your lab for 6 months? They said, yeah, come on over. Really, that's how it almost went. And I rolled from one opportunity into another, and that's now more than 26 years ago. And so now my research is really very much focused on, mostly on tomato, but also some on peppers. And I'm going to go now into the kind of research that I do. But if I think about, where all of that started, it was really already in high school with a biology teacher that taught me about DNA, RNA, protein. I didn't really change very much. So my work is grounded somehow in this process called domestication. The diversity in the fruit types that you saw on the previous slide, that's a result of a process that we call domestication. And domestication is started about 10,000 years ago, where our lifestyles changed from a hunter-gatherer lifestyle to an agricultural lifestyle, or more sedentary lifestyle. And with that, of course, we had cities emerging, but also agriculture. And so early farmers, about 10,000 years ago, started this process by taming wild plants, but also animals, obviously, for our purpose. And so this is a map of the world. The oldest area of domestication is actually here in the Fertile Crescent in the Middle East, where wheat, barley, and rye and certain pulses are domesticated. Of course, in China, we have an area that is the home of rice, of course, which rice was domesticated. In the Americas, South America, has a number of crops that were originally domesticated here, including tomato and potato. And then in Mexico, of course, the famous plant of all, perhaps in the US, corn. Corn was domesticated in Mexico, as are a certain type of pepper species. So this process took place in all foods that we eat. And in the case of tomato, I have here an example of what it actually looks like. So one of the major features of tomato is that the wild species fruit are edible, but they're tiny and they're packed with seeds, so there's very little meat to it. And over the time of domestication, that led to a major increase in fruit size, but also all these different shapes that accompany the increase in fruit size. And this forms actually the foundation of all our work. So I'm really now interested in the process of food development. So of my earlier career, I dropped the plant path part. There was an opportunity, or I didn't have the opportunities, probably more the world. When I looked for graduate schools, I applied to various programs, and there were very few programs in dermatology, plant dermatology. So I actually thought, you know, I like plants. It doesn't really matter. Of course, I could always go back to plant path at some point, but I had a great opportunity to do my PhD in a laboratory where the focus was on plant growth and development, and so that's how I kind of changed that path a little bit, and that's the theme now. So I want to know, why is this fruit? What's the basis? What are the genes that control this tomato to be long and tapered in shape, while this tomato is more oval and small in shape? And why is this tomato, it's a variety called yellow stuffer, it's a very unusual tomato. If you cut it open, it's hollow on the inside. It actually looks like a bell pepper. So I was very been interested for the last 15 plus years on identifying genes that actually control those particular features. And a lot of that, it all includes genetics, making crosses between two different types, follow them genetically, and looking at the genomes then to identify the underlying gene. And for most of these processes, it takes about 6 to 8 years to identify a gene. This is a real long-term process. But over time, we've now identified a number of genes that control this variation. And so now this is very exciting work that I want to continue here at UGA, is to look at how these genes function. So a gene is making RNA. The RNA is found in certain tissue types and at certain time points of development. That gives us an idea of how that gene functions. But the gene, the RNA, is not doing that's not doing anything typically, and RNA is translated into a protein. So what does the protein actually do in the cell? And a lot of the genes that we've identified are exciting because they're actually genes and encoding proteins that we know virtually nothing about. So the discoveries that we're making are not only helping us understand, what's controlling the shape and the size of the tomato, but it's telling us something about plant growth and development in general. So all of that work leads to, different kind of approaches, a systems biology and a modeling approach. We've done a lot of modeling of shape, and we're also doing a lot of modeling of gene expression. We're doing just classical genetic experiments, other genetic experiments, and studying protein-protein interactions. And right now, it turns out that whether you make a fruit that is very round or very elongated, the process in the plant itself, in the fruit itself, is just a number of cells that are dividing a certain way. So it's a very simple process, perhaps, but a very foundational process to all plants. So how do these cells divide in one way and not in the other way, creating the type of shape? And that's, we're identifying those genes from basically this pool of diversity. So we're getting into cell biology, cell division patterns, etc. So, but with this information, what we can also look back at is how did we actually domesticate plants? So let's say we have found this particular tomato as a gene that makes it very long. We can actually trace back in the genomes of tomato into its history. When did that mutation arise? And how did it spread through the germplasm? And so it says something about how we actually selected the tomato to look the way it does today. And this, of course, all of these approaches are not particular to tomato. You could apply this to any other crop as well. And so to wrap this up now, so I grew up in and around greenhouse. Sometimes I joke that I was born in the greenhouse. I don't think I was, but the greenhouse was next door to my parents' house. And in a family, an extended family, where life is always around, production of plants and dealing with gas prices and making profits, making money so you can pay your workers, to working now on understanding very fundamental processes that are relevant to plants. And so did I completely abandon agriculture? No, I didn't, obviously. I would be talking to the wrong crowd. So I chose a particular plant to work on, and that's tomatoes, because it is an economically very important plant. It's grown worldwide for the fresh market and processing industry, and it's also the second most important vegetable in the world. But even though, if you work on plant path, obviously there's a lot of need to improve varieties for disease resistance that will never go away. But the kind of research that we do also pertains to crop improvement, because if you think, I'm sure you do, because I've heard people say that to me, I don't care how the tomato is shaped, as long as it tastes well. And that is very true maybe for you, but the market doesn't quite work that way. You have to have a produce that consumers want to buy, a produce that lasts long enough and has the right dimensions on the plant, whether it's for harvesting purposes or other purposes. But basically, the type of the fruit, whether it's very large or very small, or whether it's round or very flat, it actually determines what type of market class of tomato you're creating. And next time you go to the grocery store, you got to pick, and you want to buy tomatoes, you got to pick those tomatoes for a purpose. So if you want to make slicing tomatoes for hamburgers or something, you're going to buy a big tomato. You're not going to come home with a pack of grape tomatoes, because they have tiny little tomatoes. So really, the form, which is the size and the shape of produce, is really relevant to the industry. Do I have any parting thoughts? Time to tie in with Julia. So I think, first of all, I have to acknowledge that I am here today for many reasons that helped many people, but certainly my family, and also my partner in life for the last 25 years here in Stockholm, who enabled me to be where I am. But I think for all of you, all the young people, all the older people, and you have children and grandchildren, is to go as far and as wide as you can. And there's no limit to what you're capable of, because you see, you don't have to have a track in front of you to find your path. But number one, you have to find a passion. You have to be excited on something. And I think you have to find a passion, and that could be in many different forms. So my passion was writing. Really, I think that's probably cut it. The other thing is that I even though I don't work directly with farmers at the time, but I'm enormously appreciative of the work farmers do. And I hope that our societies are starting to, especially the developed countries, bringing back the appreciations of farmers and how hard it actually is to make a living. Many of my uncles in the end didn't make it. They all, either their business went under because 2008 was a bad year. And it's actually really sad. This is a viable part of all communities, the farming industry, but it's really hard. And then last but not least, I'm incredibly grateful that I was not born in the generation of my parents, because my parents absolutely had no opportunity to choose the path that they desired. So I'm really grateful that I am. But I have to say, I'm also happy that I'm not a millennial, and that's for the sole purpose of that. I had opportunities to come to this country in 1990 that are practically impossible now. The visa regulations are different. I've always been legal, by the way. I've never been illegal. I always had my paperwork, but it was easier, and I was paid very little, but I got an opportunity, and my parents helped me out a little bit. I just got this great opportunity coming here that really set off an amazing career path. And I guess this is to the millennials and all of you in the room here. Please, let's keep celebrating diversity. Let's be inclusive and not exclusive. Let's not start looking inward but outward, and continue to provide opportunities to people from all types, ages, gender, races, all parts of the world, because I think that will make us greater and stronger as a society. And with that, I'll be ending my talk.
Thank you so much, Esther. That was awesome. One thing that I'm always struck with is how much more we have in common than we have in differences. You know, who would think applied animal scientist from South Georgia would have a lot in common with a brilliant basic researcher from the Netherlands? But the interesting thing, I spent a lot of time in Ecuador this past year. Their #1 export are flowers, and many of them come from Amsterdam. I've been learning a lot about their rose production, and just to think that her family, that's the business. So, I think the advice that both of our speakers gave us today as far as following your passion, I really never knew exactly what I wanted to do. I just knew I wanted it to be tied to agriculture in some way. So I think that's what I tell students, that's what I tell kids is, you know what, if you don't wake up every single day excited to do what you're doing, you need to find something else to do because, life's too hard not to. So I thank you, and I thought that was incredibly interesting. At this time, I want to open it up for questions. We have a few minutes. So Julia and Esther, if y'all don't mind coming back up to the front, we'll take questions from the Athens audience, and then if there are questions from the remote audiences, if you would raise your hand, we will let the audio be turned on, or you can type in the text chat. So, any questions from this room?
I'll ask something. I'm Maria Bowie, and I'm working communications. Joy, both of your talks very much. But I wondered if both of you could speak a little bit to work-life balance. I think you kind of touched on it a little bit. And I know that that's something that, as a mom with 3 kids, we always have to find that balance. I'd love to hear more of your perspective on that.
I think this is the expert. I don't have children.
Well, when the kids were little, you did kids and you did work, and that was pretty much it. And like I said, I think you make choices every day. There were choices I had to make to miss some things for them. There were choices that I made to say, no, I'm not going to do this at work because it's going to put too much strain on my family. But I think like I said, I showed you the picture of my family now. I used to worry tremendously that I was screwing everything up. I did. I mean, we all do. You're putting your baby in childcare. Oh my gosh. And this was, the mommy culture. If you weren't sitting on the floor playing with your kid, you were doing something wrong, I never could do that. But I have 3 wonderful kids. We're very close. So somehow we all survived, and I think maybe that's something to say, you will survive, and you're making the right choices, and don't worry about it so much.
One time someone told me that it's more important for your kids to see you having a job that you love than for you to be there constantly, And I will tell you that I asked Julia to speak previously, but she couldn't because her daughter was getting married and she was having the wedding at her house, and she had planted all these flowers. And if you look back at that picture, there's a row of sunflowers. She planted all those. She grew all the flowers for the wedding. I think that's a great example of you can't have it all the time, but you can have it all some of the time, And so I think that, and I mean, Lauren and I talk about this a lot, and that's one of the things as an older person I tell her who has 2 babies, you know what, you're in crisis mode for a little while. Yeah. But the bottom line is I'm way over here on the opposite end of the spectrum. I mean, I'm still trying to get my kids successfully grown up. They're 17 and 18 now. But the thing about it is, it looks a whole lot different now than it did when you're in the midst of the turmoil. So sometimes you got to kind of get off of that balcony and know that it won't be like this forever, So, and I bet you those stay-at-home moms feel exactly the same way, So
and when they're out of the nest, I'm an empty nester, and I'll tell you what, it's great. I love it. I love my kids. I'm going to see them this weekend, but I picked up the cello again. I'm not going to soccer games every weekend. And it's wonderful to have grown children. You who have babies enjoy them, but it's super cool to have grown children.
Well, another thing that I tell people when I'm recruiting them for Extension is I think that Extension is probably one of the most flexible jobs in the universe, all the way from a county program assistant or a county agent all the way up through an Extension specialist. You have a lot of autonomy on what programs you plan, what the direction that you take your career in, and I think that's really true in teaching and research as well. So I think you have to look at those kind of silver linings. So any other questions from our local audience? We're getting pretty close to the 1 o'clock. Yes, ma'am.
I loved hearing your stories and how they weren't always a path that you had planned. And it's so nice to see a successful result. But I wanted to ask, how did you deal with moments of self-doubt? I'm thinking about this, you've laid out this really successful, but looks so nice, but I can see in there things where you were thinking to yourself, I wasn't sure if this was what I was supposed to be doing. I kind of did it as a part-time thing. I wasn't making a lot of money. I wasn't sure about things. And it sounds like you've had successes in areas where you weren't totally sure you were doing what you wanted to be doing.
Yeah, I think we both presented the success story. We can have another hour of And I think, Julie, you had it on your slide. It's that yes attitude. Don't get bogged down by things not working out, but finding another way. So at Ohio State, I was faced with that type of work that I really wanted to do. Was very hard to do there. And so I tried to actually venture out in another area, and I wasn't as successful as I was used to. So I could have kind of given up, but you just then find ways around it. Either you go back to where you began, or you just modify. And I think that's a thing. Maybe for us all, but certainly in academia, you have to be ready to adapt all the time because nothing is the same. Every few years, technology changes, funding opportunities change, or whatever. You have to adapt. You have to embrace that.
And also, I mean, speaking to it, you're going to go through, like when I left consulting, I hit rock bottom. I left because I was having to travel, not just in the state, but to Puerto Rico. It sounds great, right? All over the country. And it was putting a huge strain on the family. And I took a big pay cut to come back here, and I'll just be frank about it. But it was well worth it for a lot of reasons. But it got really, really bad. That's what made me have to find something new. So I don't want to sound like Pollyanna, but sometimes when you hit those crisis moments, it is you have to look for what your door or the open window, right? Open the window and crawl out and find that next opportunity and make the most of it that you can.
So you're human.
Yeah,
very much so.
Yeah, I think it's making opportunities work for you too. So when I came to Ohio State, I didn't have a tenure track position. And I actually had to get 4 grants, federal funded grants, before they took me serious. And I should get a fed. I didn't really care that much about the title, but I had difficulty attracting students because my position is not tenure track. And so you just have to create the opportunity because you can do that and things will change. They will.
I have to echo that because I'm public service. And, since this is full confession, guys, you'll notice I don't have a PhD. I have a master's. But I have always functioned and acted professionally, and I love doing research. And I've done it, and most people call me Dr. Gaskin, and I have to correct them. So it's what she was saying, do it, do the work, and you're going to get the credit for it. And I hope that our universities will not get so credential-oriented. I don't feel like there's just true confessions. I don't think there's an opportunity for someone like me anymore. Very rare. So, it's something that you all have to fight, that idea that there are these perfect credentials. I think sometimes when you find the right people and turn them loose, I've had wonderful collaborators and wonderful staff to work with. You don't ever see a program or get an award for something that you did. It's a wonderful environment and people that you are working with, and that support staff, the administrative staff, the farm crew, they all make it happen for you.
Well, I want to stay true to time. It is 1:07, so I don't see any chat from the distance sites. So at this time, I just want to thank our speakers. We have a nice little token of our appreciation for you putting yourself out there, because I think the honesty and your story is encouraging and refreshing to others, and really does help, particularly the younger people. So thank you so much for being with us today. It was just as good as I thought it was going to be, and I'm just delighted to be able to showcase 2 of our excellent faculty in this college. So thank you all for coming, and please tell your friends about this, because we haven't had a bad one yet. I mean, there are incredible stories being told, and send me your suggestions of people you would like to have featured. I would appreciate that as well. So thank you so much for being here, and once again, Carla, thank you for helping me set this all up, and we will stop the recording.